Have you ever worried if you were doing too much or not doing enough when it comes to training and educating your child or children? Can you relate? If even for only a tiny bit to this joke from the hilarious Whitney Cummings when she says, "My definition of love is being willing to die for someone that you yourself want to kill." If any of these thoughts come into your mind, if even for a split second, welcome to my world and the inner workings of my mind. In this podcast on homeschooling, I will attempt to answer some of the frequent questions I get as a home educating mother of three. What made me decide to homeschool? The short answer is that I thought that or rather, both my husband and I together could do a better job raising, training, and educating our kids than the state government. There wasn't one particular event or experience that gave me the idea to homeschool my child. It was sort of a slow and steady conglomeration of ideas and life experiences, some of which became more obvious the more I observed, taught, and reflected on what I wanted to teach my child and thinking about the ways that she learned. As a young mother, a part of me tried not to get swept up, into everything society tells you need in order to be a good mother. And all of the products they, market to you, all the literature they tell you need to read in order for your child to succeed and thrive in life. But, it's a little inevitable to get sucked in the vortex of all the latest noise and how to get your child to sleep. Listening to European classical music will make your baby smarter. Teaching babies sign language, feeding them organic foods, on and on and on and on. It gets overwhelming. It wasn't until, though, I sat still with myself and my child and turned off all the noise and paid closer attention to her and myself that I started to gain more security as a mother in those early months. Because we want to do a good job as young moms, we can put so much undue pressure on ourselves. When my firstborn was 4 years old, she started to ask, as we were driving on the road or walking, what different signs and billboards said, trying to sound out words as we were driving. And, hearing her ask so many questions about what things meant and how to say things, I knew it was time for her to start learning how to read. And also before this, she had been quote unquote reading, some of her favorite bedtime stories from memory to herself as well. So seeing her do that, I started sight words with her. And after starting those sight words, she was off and flying. I mean, by 5, she was reading those ready to read books that, you have the different levels. She was reading by herself. She would have started kindergarten about a month shy of 6 years. And I knew from how much she was learning and what she had sort of mastered already and the energy that she has, she would be bored out of her mind, if I put her in school. And after observing a kindergarten class during my student teaching, the teacher had a girl who was very observant, who she asked a lot of questions, and she was sort of ahead of her peers in the class. Her desk was sitting off to the side and I asked the teacher, why is her desk sitting off to the side? And she said, if I didn't have her there, I couldn't really kind of control her and get to her easily. Basically, she would try to take over the class and teach the class. And so when she was sort of explaining to me, why the child was in the corner and me asking her questions I just saw my daughter. I saw so much of my daughter in this girl. And I was like, I don't want to see her sitting off in the class and her being bored and her just kind of having to wait around for, everyone else when she had gotten something quicker, So I could see a lot of my daughter in this child, and I said, she will be bored out of her mind and likely getting in trouble or getting busy work because, she's ahead of her, head of the class or head of whatever the standards are at the time. She has a natural desire for learning and questioning. And because of the work that I had already been doing with her, I knew that I just kind of could envision her, just having a challenge or having a hard time being, following the school guideline or layout. My oldest is 9. I also have an almost 6-year-old. She'll be 6 in about a month, a little over a month. And I have a 3-year-old, and we are still on this home educating journey. After coming out of sort of the zombie mom stage, which for me, honestly, I feel like I'm still kind of like just getting out of it, and my son is 3, but it seemed like after each child, it lasted a little over 2 years. After 2 years, I felt like, oh, my mind is kind of coming back. But after coming out of that stage, I would read about what was going on in education in our state of Georgia, in our city, and I sort of kept my ear to the ground a little more on what was going on in education. And there was this teaching scandal in Atlanta a few years ago. I think it was 2014, or was it 15? I think it was 2014. But after this teaching scandal came out, it further put just a bad taste in my mouth when it came to high stakes standardized testing and what it does to educators and what it does to schools. And I didn't want my child in that environment. That was a further indicator, I don't want my children to be in that environment where and I kind of lean heavily towards the side of the teachers because I know that there are amazing teachers out there that are teaching in public schools, teachers who love to teach, teachers who are drawn to teach, but because of the stresses and in the back of their minds, I'm sure, in order to keep my job and be financially rewarded, I have to increase these test scores by any means necessary. And, you had this No Child Left Behind by President George W. Bush, that he had. And then President Obama has this Race to the Top, which is his educational program from his administration. And what it does is it places, of course, increasingly higher stakes on standardized test scores. They have to go up or else there will be negative consequences, not just for the students, but for the schools and teachers and principals. And, I didn't. And again, with this program, it would pit states against each other in competing for federal funds in exchange for, implementing some of the specific school reforms. But, it kind of put this pressure on teachers, on schools to increase test scores. And they linked teacher evaluations to the test scores. So teachers got evaluated and sort of pay raise or their pay based on the testing scores. And this is from, this information is from an article that I read in the Washington Post titled "How and Why Convicted Atlanta Teachers Cheated on Standardized Tests." So I did not want my children in that environment, and I didn't want to be sort of trying to finagle my way in trying to figure out how can I, as a parent, help in this circumstance. I don't know. I just thought I would do a better job and be less stressed out myself by just educating, I guess in one way, by educating my children myself. And also just with the high stakes testing, can you really know what these kids know? With all of this testing, I feel like it hurts and cripples like the teachers and the kids. I mean, you really can't know. Like when I student taught in a 5th grade class, and one of the things that I saw in that class, which was what they called kind of a combination class. And basically you had students who were gifted, considered gifted, quote unquote. You also had students who were special needs. And you had the regular, and they were all in the class together. It was a class of 19 students. And what I saw in this class, watching the students, you had these students who could read on, a couple students who can read on like 11th grade level, but they couldn't really communicate that well, like in a conversation, with other kids. Then you had other kids who would, like, just any free time they got, their head was stuck in a book. This one kid, actually, the only time he perked up was when we did science. You had another kid who had a hard time with science and had a hard time with different other subjects. But when it came to art, when they would have like projects, and, he shined when it came to doing the artwork for whatever that project they were doing. And I just saw that all these kids are so different, and they have strengths in their own areas. Yes, certain areas, yes, basics, you have to know your, basic math and how to read, but everything else, like, there was one kid who was just good at organizing, like the class in a way, like people followed him. He was kind of like a natural leader, but they all had strengths in different areas. And the school system isn't built to teach in that way. It's built for everyone to kind of learn a certain type of way for the most part. And you have your breaks, you have like kind of, this is the time where we learn math. This is the time where we learn social studies. This is the time where we do language arts. Oh, there's a break. Here's a special. So just if you were kind of on a roll, kind of stuff, something was clicking during that, say, science that you were doing before you had to go to a special, then that connection or that kind of idea was shut down, because you're like, okay, close your books, put everything away. It's time to go to specials. And so, I just realized that I wanted my children to have just a more individualized and a richer education experience. What are some of the requirements in the state of Georgia? Georgia is pretty easy. Georgia requires that you fill out and keep for your records a declaration of intent. And all of the requirements are on the Georgia Department of Education website. They have you fill that out every year. And the state requires 180 days of schooling with the minimum of 4.5 hours of instruction a day. And to be honest, we're learning all year round. The kids are learning all year round. They have questions all year round. There's not a time when you turn it off. I mean, and say, okay, we're done with school for however many weeks or whatever. They're always learning, always having ideas, always wanting to do certain projects on their own. So they're always learning, I guess, in that sense. What's another requirement? Oh, when they would be age-wise completing 3rd grade and every 3 years afterwards. So grades 3, 6, 9, and 12, they're required to take their first nationally standardized test. So at grades 3, and then 3 more times after that, every 3 years. And then that's it. That's what Georgia requires. What is my teaching philosophy? I get asked this, especially from those who are trained teachers. My teaching philosophy comes from, honestly, all the ways that I wished I would have been taught and nurtured by family, professional educators, and community during my grade school years, which is to be taught as a whole human being, with a complex life, with painful experiences, thinking about the environment that I grew up in. That's kind of how I go about teaching my kids, not, the public school compartmentalized input of bits of knowledge, again, like I stated before, allotting, this amount of minutes for this subject, that subject. but kind of just teaching them as a whole person. And for me, I think for me, being whole and what wholeness means to me is healing, healing from the painful past that we have, from, ways that we've learned that have sort of not allowed us to step fully into who we are and who we were designed to be. And for me, I think learning is a place of healing and has been a place of healing. I read a lot of people who write about education, spirituality, community, social issues, politics, especially women. I read men as well, but especially women. Because I realized the more I read, the more I sat still and read, the more I was learning, the more I was dealing with myself, the more I was asking questions that I didn't feel comfortable asking before or in the grade school environment. So I don't want to be fragmented or, to perpetuate that in my children or my, slash students, because they are learning from me. I don't want them to disappear a part of themselves or all of themselves to be a robot to sort of pass on the type of knowledge that input in, spit out. So as long as I give it to you and you have this great recall, this quick recall, you're smart. There's nothing wrong with being able to quote facts and, kind of memorize facts. But I realized just that in school, I wasn't like the best at recalling quickly facts, and those who were considered smart. And, with me and raising my kids, I have a daughter who has great recall. I have a daughter who doesn't have great recall, but has strengths in other areas, and that is just as valid and just as needed. And so the way I think about education really is along the lines of paideia, which according to the National Paideia Institute means, this paideia philosophy means it to celebrate the fundamental idea that to be fully educated is a lifelong adventure that only begins with an individual's formal schooling. And I differ from that slightly because I think that education and training starts before formal education begin. I guess like when you insert them into public schooling or private schooling. When my child is nursing and bite down on, your nipple, and you tell them, you're looking at them, they see you wince and you tell them, no, you do not do that. That hurts. They're learning right then and there that what they did, they should, if they do that again, you will not drink your milk. You will not eat. Kind of take it away. You will not eat. Like they're learning then and there. Okay, if I do this, I will not get what I need. I will not bite the hand that feeds me. So I think even as infants, we're teaching our children, they're learning what it means to be a human being, what it means to relate to another human being. I'm just now, within the past 2 to 3 years, very recently, honestly, wrestling with myself and coming to a point where I can look more objectively sort of at my kind of how I grew up and how I was educated and raised, at my dysfunctional family. And if you are a family made up of more than one person, I am convinced there is some type of dysfunction. Human beings dealing with other messy human beings, dealing with each other, there's going to be some dysfunction. But I realized that, going back to the wholeness aspect of what it means to be whole, I realized that it's impossible for a family, for a community, or public school educators to have taught me what it means to be whole if they haven't experienced that themselves. What it means to be a whole human. They cannot pass on, what it means to be, this is how you kind of cultivate confidence and a sense of self in loving who you are and what your strengths are, not trying to make you be, what I guess the dominant cool thing is to be, or what the dominant personality or way of learning is. But I realized that it's impossible for them to pass that on if they don't understand that themselves, if they haven't gotten that themselves. And I was listening to just a conversation between Parker J. Palmer, who is a writer, an activist, and an intellectual, and my beloved Bell Hooks. But he said in this conversation, you can't believe in something that you haven't experienced. Because when you think about what is wholeness? Some people are like, what do you mean wholeness? Or what is that? What are you talking about? You're a little cuckoo, but you can't believe in something that you haven't experienced. This is what he said. There is a certain level which, if you haven't been able to receive the gift of wholeness, ourselves, it's impossible to hand that on. So an educator that has not experienced wholeness for themselves cannot hand it on to their students. You can hand on to the solution of a math problem, or a body of sociological data, or some historical facts, or a theory in physics, but you can't hand on those personal intangibles which you have not received as gifts in your own right. And I think about that as I teach my kids, and as I reflect on the things that I wish I would have been taught, or just the lack thereof. I think about how I want to pass on that sort of kind of teaching and training and educating the whole human being. And a huge part of that also is exhibiting that as a person myself to my kids, showing them, being honest with them when I make mistakes, or when they make mistakes, kind of telling them. And they love this when, I don't know, say they lie about something, and we have a conversation about that, and I say, you know what? I lied as a kid too. And in some cases, I lied worse than you just did right now. But you see, and then I explain to them how that breaks down relationships, how that erodes trust, and how it doesn't make for healthy communion with each other as a family. But kind of continually talking to the kids about these things, sharing with them how I've messed up, and so that they can see, you know what, this authority figure is not above, making mistakes, or, doing things that we're, like, just not above making mistakes. And so that's, in one way, that's different from how, I grew up. If you lied, if you did anything, if you had an attitude and you didn't know how to flesh it out, if you were rolling your eyes or stumping your foot, in my family, you got a spanking, you got the beat down. There was no room for questioning, to ask questions. And that's another thing that I do. I invite them to ask questions, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But for me, to ask questions was considered kind of like a threat. Like, you don't ask questions, that's considered subversive. And knowing my mom now, and knowing the fact that she couldn't ask questions, like, they would get popped in the mouth, or kind of scolded and rashly told, you don't ask questions, that's not your place. But I invite questions, even though sometimes it drives me crazy, because they ask so many. They're natural critical thinkers, and I think I'll talk more about that in a bit. But, those are the things that I want to pass on to my kids, just educating them as a whole. Also being active participants in learning. Like, I want them to actively, engage in what they're learning. And, and they do that naturally, but continuing to, like, guide them as they have their questions. For example, let's say one of my daughters asked once, Mom, what does it mean to, or no, not what does it mean? She said, how do people talk? That's what she said. how do people talk? And I said, what do you mean, how do people talk? Like, how do words come out of our mouths and we can hear them? This was my 5-year-old at the time. And I said, that is a very good question. You know, let's go to the library and get a book and ask the librarian if she can give us books, kind of how humans talk. And we had this whole lesson on her, had this conversation on the fact that there are muscles in our throats, there are vibrations, sound vibrations that come out of our mouth, that we have to be in the right atmosphere, that is on Earth. We couldn't hear each other talk if we were on the moon. Like, we learned so much, and I learned so much with her, through that. So she's naturally active in her learning, and she's participating, by me going and get more resources and fleshing out the answer to her question more. But with all of this bringing up human beings, and educating the whole person, I realized, and I'm still learning really, that healthy boundaries are needed. Self-care is essential. Children have the tendency to suck the life out of you. As a mom, literally, if you nurse them physically, emotionally, and mentally, I find that giving myself the charge of their education in this day and age, it really does mean, a lot of work and a lot of my time just around them and giving to them, and having very few breaks, because you are, the nurse, you're the encourager, you're the disciplinarian, you're the guide, you're the principal, you're the teacher, and so sometimes I ask myself, with all of this, will all of this effort be worth it? Is it worth all this time and energy that I'm investing in them, when I turned out okay, I can function as an adult. So will it be worth it? And I say this especially because I am not getting an income. I'm not out working doing this. There are single moms who do this, and there are other families also that home educate as well, that the mom and dad works, but mostly I've found that it's the moms who stay home and do primarily the educating. But there are dads too who work from home that also are involved in the education. But I do ask myself, is it worth it? When we had a couple of friends over for dinner, and they're both engineers, awesome people, very, together in the sense of their, they've gone to school, they're scheduled, they're, well, their finances, their life, they just kind of didn't have kids early to kind of get in the way of them kind of getting sort of a good grip on their finances before they start thinking about having a family. But I found myself getting a little jealous when they were both talking about, yeah, we just got a raise and this much percentage. And I was just like, huh. I kind of like half jokingly kind of leaned on my husband and said, I wish I got a raise, every year. But it's true. Like, I do think, sometimes is it worth it, that we, but anyways, I'll get more into that in a little bit when I get into the pros and cons, but I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself. But maybe there are some of you moms out there who are much more at ease and not as wound up as I can be. I can be a bit of a control freak in certain areas when it may be easier to just let go. It is helpful to have a homeschool group. You have a support group and, a bit of a respite with other families who are also going against the grain to educate their children. It gives, others to bounce ideas off of, to get encouragement from, to share, your strengths, I guess. Like, you can share there are some people who are good at art, some people who are, have background in education, some people who are graphic designers, and like sort of different areas of expertise that you can glean from, and different strength. There's people with different strengths and areas of interest and knowledge. So you don't feel alone, like you're on this island alone. But it's funny, the first year I started to officially, according to the state, homeschool, I thought, everyone can do this. We mothers and fathers, we were built for this. Why are we sending them and complaining about how the school's not measuring up? But then the more I learned and experienced, and just continuing to live with my kids, and being with them a vast majority of the day, I realized, that no, not necessarily. It's not for everyone. The more I sort of even dealt with myself and realized that I struggle with anxiety and depression, that there are some mothers who struggle big time in these areas, and in various forms and levels of depression and anxiety. And it wouldn't be wise for certain people or helpful for them or their children to be around each other for long periods of time. And so I know I've had to find helpful groups for me in this particular area of homeschoolers who decide to educate their children and also cope with anxiety and depression. But I do realize that it's not for everyone. And I am grateful that there is a place, that there are public schools where you pay your tax dollars regardless. We don't get any stipends or any pay for taking our kids out and teaching them ourselves. But there is a place where you can send your kids and have them be educated when you feel like, if you're thinking about it, you're like, oh, I'm not really capable of that. Okay. There's a school there that you can put them in. Maybe some parents are, or not maybe, I'm sure there are some parents who are way better at supplementing what their kids aren't getting at school, at home, and over the summer, over breaks. And so I get that. It's not for everyone because it's a heavy load, it really is. But now this leads me into the pros and cons of homeschooling. As an educator, wife, mother, how am I vulnerable, and thinking about how I'm vulnerable. I guess I've already shared a little bit of that, but here are the pros and cons. So in this sort of profession of upbringing children, and I say profession because I do believe that mindful parenting, is sort of a calling. Like, not everyone is meant to be a parent. I know there's tons of parents out there. There's tons of people that have kids, but I really do believe that not every woman or man should feel pressure or feel obligated to have a child. There are so many other ways to have a positive impact on humanity and on the world. I think about women that I admire, and some of the women have stepped into their vocation or their profession in various areas of science, engineering, diplomacy, caretakers, bridge builders, activists, nurses. And the same for men as well. Not every male is meant to be a father. When I look around the world and look through history and, all the way up to the present, I really say to myself, some people just shouldn't procreate. And to be honest, I place myself on that list at times. Like, what in the world were we thinking? I don't want to repeat any crazy past history and have them deal with the same issues, But, sorry, that's a topic for a whole nother podcast in itself. Just talking about women and having children, the pressure to do that, or not feeling like you're whole or enough if you don't, and the whole adoption. Anyways, that's another idea I have. But really, another one of the pros, I think, is that I'm able to teach my children to think critically, to question, even though, as I stated before, it drives me crazy sometimes that they ask so many questions. But they are natural critical thinkers. Children are always asking what, when, how, why, of everything from the religion that you have. They ask you questions that, I mean, my kids have asked me questions that really made me think, like, why do I believe this? And what, you know, for example, one of the kids said, and this is in the Christian religion. Now, how is that possible? Like, how does Jesus, walk through walls? Like, doesn't that defy God's laws of gravity? Like basically the natural laws of gravity. And I was like, I never thought of that like that before. That is a great question. And it made me think and it made me question. But they're not that's one of the things that I love. That's what I'm saying. One of the pros of teaching them, because I'm learning with them and from them as they're learning from me. But a con is there are not a lot of immediate rewards. Some rewards are immediate, but a lot of it isn't. So I'm having less meltdowns, honestly, and learning to let go of my need for immediate affirmation. I would have these sort of complaining sessions like, talking to my husband, well, at work, at least you have meetings and they tell you that you're doing great in a certain area and the areas that you need to work on. And you have customers, who are great to you. And of course, I'm sure he has a lot of customers who he wants to just not deal with, but you have an environment where you're getting affirmation, you're getting that constant acknowledgement that you're worth, you're a good part of that particular store or whatever. But for me, you don't get that. You don't get, what? You did great today, Mom. What you taught your daughter today, do you know that tomorrow a connection's going to be made in her brain to where if you didn't teach her that today or last week, she wouldn't have gotten that connection? Way to go, Mom. Oh, wow, Mom, you know how you keep telling your daughter over and over again to be respectful in how she communicates to people when she doesn't like what they say or what they ask her, especially adults, and she rolls her eyes and have an attitude, and you're constantly telling her over and over again how that's not respectful and that's not the way that you deal with people. Oh, it really does get better. Like, it really does get better next week. Like, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but you just don't have that immediate affirmation when you're around your kids and in the thick of it, raising them and educating them and training them. And so that's one of the things that I struggle with. And I'm learning to be gentler with myself and more secure as a person, and sort of letting go of that need again to have that immediate reward or that immediate affirmation that I'm doing a good job or whatever. Another thing that I love, I enjoy watching them learn. I like that I have kind of a little bit sort of control over keeping them from being hurt mentally, physically, and spiritually, that I can kind of guide them in those areas in these formative years. Not that you couldn't do that when they're in school, but there's just a different way parents can do it when, you homeschool. You have more controlled environments, more intimate setting with parents and other kids, so that you can deal with things that come up quicker and in a healthy way, that you don't have to, truck up to a school and kind of find a time to meet with another parent that may be worn out from like you just have a sort of a kind of close-knit, almost kind of community where you can deal with issues when they come up of children, human beings not getting along or, misunderstanding. But those are some, what are some more pros and cons? I guess not only having one income, just having one income. My husband works for a great company. You know, they take care of us. We have great insurance and that stuff. But if he misses work, like there's twice he had to have surgery, you know, he had a slip disc in his back and he had a hernia. So if he misses work and misses days of work, yeah, you know, you can get like a little disability, but that's it. Like you don't get paid leave. Like that is it. So you don't have a full check the next week, and you might have to ask family for money to pay a bill or whatever, or friends who have money, you know, like, so that's a part that I would, you know, that is, can be frustrating to me, that if my husband gets hurt, I'm not, what I'm doing is not bringing in income, and we don't have like extra money flowing in, so that can kind of dampen those moments where, you know, inevitably he can hurt himself or get sick, or, you know, if he's out of sick days, then what do you do about those other days, you know, that aren't paid for that other time? And so that can be a bit of a strain, you know, just living check to check in that way in this day and age. It's just, I wish there was some sort of compensation for families who homeschooled, some sort of stipend, some sort of government, you know, acknowledgement in the form of financial, you know, things, but that's not the case here. So that's one of the cons. I wish that, you know, I'm always trying to find little ways to bring in more income to kind of ease the burden and ease the load. So that's one of my cons, or in our particular, you know, financial bracket. Do I use a certain curriculum? That's another question I get asked. The short answer to that question is that our curriculum is the library. I mean, honestly, I love the library. I love my progressive librarians. You know, even if we don't agree on the same things about what's going on in society, what's going on in the world, how we look at race, or how we look at economics, the librarians still want you and gets a kick out of you wanting to learn, wanting to read. They're always working with my daughters, especially the oldest one, who can kind of have conversations with them now. They know her. We go every week, and she has a relationship with them. So as she's growing through her book, she was in mysteries and investigating things for a long while. She's into fantasy and sort of, yeah, she's getting in more of the fantasy realm now, it looks like. She was in this kind of like mode where she's reading a lot about the real stories, like the dark stories of these fairy tales, not the Disney versions. So that was a little scary, but like, I don't like gory things, Aria. You know, I don't like gory things. Don't tell me all the details about that. But you know, the librarian works with her and kind of goes with her interests and asks her questions and suggests things. I mean, I've suggested things to, when she's kind of in one zone, I suggest things to break up that sort of, you know, Nancy Drew zone she was in for a while. She read all the Nancy Drews she could get her hands on, but the library is our curriculum. And again, like I said before, I do a lot of listening to their questions. Like again, for my example, when my daughter said, how do people talk? We had from that question, we had a mini science lesson. What else? Yeah, so the librarians are there to answer a lot of questions, to give us certain resources when we have certain projects that we're doing. Like, for example, now with the two other homeschooling families, we are doing together this cultural studies project where we're going to pick a country, and the goal is to have the kids experience another country, not from a tourist point of view, you know, where you're like learning about the other, like they're totally different from you, but kind of learning about a country, their history, who are some of their famous, the people that stands out in their history that they hold up as famous. Did they have indigenous people in their country before it became what it is today? You know, what are some of their religions, their holidays, what they celebrate, and kind of looking at the differences in these cultures and their history and their culture, their music, everything that's involved with them, and seeing how we're like, how they're like us, you know, just seeing the humanity, the common humanity across. So I'm so excited about that because that's in my area. I am strongly into, and I read a lot about cultures and peoples and how we interact with each other and history and from all around the world. So that's my realm. And so I'm excited to do that with the other families and with the kids, and to pull our strengths together and give the kids sort of just a history, culture, world history, almost, you know, cultural lesson and project that we can do together. So the library is our curriculum. There are times also when I create lessons and experiences from ideas I have. So that was one, the cultural studies lesson that we're doing. But during flu season last year, we had a lesson on germs and bacteria. We watched videos, created crafts of germs, both good and bad bacteria, let them see pictures of that and kind of draw that themselves. And we are lucky, and we read books, of course, and we're lucky enough to have the CDC here in our city, and even doubly lucky to have a friend who works at the CDC. So I got to take the kids. We went to take a tour of the CDC, the museum that's inside, and have our friend who's an immunologist who went to school for immunology to guide us and talk with us as we walked around the museum. But that was great. You know, I'm sure a lot of that went over their heads, but I know that the main thing they remembered from that day and that experience was that mosquitoes are the #1 killer in the world. That, you know, mosquitoes pass malaria. Malaria kills a lot of people, and it carries a lot of diseases that kills a ton of people. So, and it's interesting because they asked me more questions after we left than we were there with the expert, you know, with the person that works in that particular area. But so that was a lesson that we did. I have another friend who works for a solar energy company as an engineer there. And I'm planning on putting a lesson together on energy, kind of like a science lesson. And then one of the areas of energy we're going to talk about, I guess we're going to talk about all the different ways we create energy and use energy, from wind, water, air, and, you know, petroleum, I guess, coal, natural resources, energy, and solar energy. But so I'm going to put together a lesson for that. And then we're going to talk about solar energy. And then we're going to go and visit my friend at his, you know, work, and kind of have them talk to us about solar energy. What are the benefits? What are some of the challenges of having solar energy, and why isn't it, you know, readily available for everyone? What are the pros and cons of it? And just having them answer questions that the kids might have. And I'm sure they'll have many good questions about, you know, for them on that. Another thing that's high priority for me is reading and math. You know, those are two things that are reinforced every day. So reading, you know, whether it's reading signs, reading, you know, menus, just kind of in society, you have letters and words and literacy coming at you in many different ways. And math, of course, where my kids want to buy things and they go to the cash register and they have to count. I teach them even today when we go. And for my middle one, my oldest one, she's much better at counting and giving the correct change and all that. But the middle one, who's kindergarten age, she's still working on that. So she's doing her basic math at home, and then she goes out when she buys something with her allowance. I have her give the money to the cashier. I have her listen to what the cashier says. And, so it's reinforced kind of throughout life and every day. So that's one thing that I do for math and reading, and I'm reading to them all the time. Like, that's because I love to read. I read to them from when they're little. Like, we will have a story every night, and now sometimes we have them every night, but we're always reading at least at some point during the day. There was one point when I was reading to them every night before bed. We had this big book of kind of fairy stories that we would read. We finished that, but now we read every day. I'll say that much, but we don't always read right before bed as a bedtime routine. I need to do that more with my younger one now. I feel like sometimes he's missing out, not getting as much as the oldest one got, of course, because he's the third one in. But so that's, I guess a part of how I teach and how we learn and the things that we do. What's something else? Well, in my own personal reading and study of history, for example, I lean more towards the stories of the people, on the macro level, the people like the slaves in America, in the United States, I guess, in this country. I lean more towards the history of the Native Americans, the slaves, the laborers, the immigrants, the factory workers, just the people, the workers. And when I look at cultures around the world, I'm always on the side of the people who have been colonized. And I can really have a hard time seeing the colonizer and those who are the wealthy elite of the world as human beings. And I know that the same can be said flip-flopped. They can have a hard time, people who are wealthy or who've grown up with money and not many financial problems or issues and have had many resources, available to them through family and through just how they've grown up. I know that sometimes for them, especially the super uber wealthy, the elite, like, it's hard for them to see just regular working people as human beings. And so knowing that I personally lean towards the side of the people, I guess that would be the leftist side. I care more about what happens to the people in the macro, poor people who have to work, and people who have been oppressed. I lean more towards that side, but I know that there's that whole other side that I grew up with where where your teachers are teaching you that, these presidents, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and all these, guys created this Declaration of Independence. And, they didn't tell us they were slave owners, but basically these slave owners who owned people and didn't consider them fully human, these are the forefathers of this nation. And they basically you're kind of taught to kind of have this sort of patriotism, this nationalism, this look at these people who, had this revolution and to get away from the British and not be taxed. And, so because I know in myself that I lean more towards one side, and I know that there will always be people that agree with the other side, I guess leaning far right, that I'm going to at least give my children at least two sides. I hope they get two sides. I hope they get more than that, at least 7 sides. But I'm at least going to give them the side that I lean heavily towards. They're definitely going to get that. And then also show them and read to them and teach them kind of the nationalist side, the kind of, the side that I didn't see any of myself in at all, honestly, as a person of color, a Black African American, I guess, you know, growing up in the South in the United States. But I'm going to show them those two sides and have them kind of come up with their own ideas or have their own thoughts about how human and how government, how we are supposed to deal with each other, how we've dealt with each other in the history, and how that history affects how we're living today and what we're seeing today. So that's a challenge, because I think, again, learning for me has been a source of healing. It's also been painful because you see things in yourself or that you've learned or things that you've held that, oh gosh, that's painful to have to let go because that's not true, or that doesn't lend itself to helping humanity move further towards healing. Having myself move towards healing, and definitely not humanity. So certain things, it's painful in learning. You have to let go of things and kind of die to that part of yourself in a way, to grow and to see things from more than just a tunnel vision, one way. But I'm not perfect in that area, and I'm still kind of trying to grow in that area. And I hope I'm passing that on to my kids, that they can kind of have sort of a well-rounded education and way of looking at the world. So that's what I'm wrestling with now, with trying to teach in an unbiased way. I guess it's kind of hard to be completely unbiased, but as much as I can, and to teach them in an unbiased way, and not teaching all logical thinking. This is the way to dot, dot, dot. And this is the IQ test, because whatever, an IQ test, that's like teaching, I don't know, testing one way of thinking, one way, white male dominated way of thinking. And I'm like, there's so many different ways and so many things that measure and, you know, that shows intelligence, and not one way. You don't have to feel dumb or less than because you either don't know your IQ score or you didn't make the cut or whatever. But so I'm that's a way that I'm trying to kind of incorporate teaching them in a diverse way, that not everything has to be logical and not everything has to be all sensory and feeling. Like, there's a balance that we're all ways working to try to get to in some way. And that's why I have other people, other friends who are different from me around, and I expose them to people who are different from me, who think differently, and work with them so they can see that, you know, not everybody has to think the same way or be into the same things in order to move forward or get stuff done or work together or be friends. So that they can understand how to put things into context as well, especially with history and social studies, because they ask questions about what's going on in our society. You know, why me and Dad, you know, as an interracial couple, have had heated discussions about in the past about, and more calm discussions, but still discussions now. But in the past, it was just very heated and emotional about police brutality and how heavily the Black and brown communities get policed, and how there's nothing new about police states for us, that it's always sort of been that way, especially for me growing up poor. But yeah, so they get to see from both my husband and I, who grew up two different ways, two different, you know, races, two different backgrounds on the opposite end of the country, that we're together, and we, you know, we grow together, we conversate, we don't agree on everything and how we look at the world, but there are certain things that we definitely agree on, and they get to see those differences and see how we both let go of certain things and meet in the middle, and grow in our understanding of people and each other. So those, I guess that's my curriculum, I guess, you know, in the school of life, we're learning and growing. And how long do I plan to home educate my children? Let's see. Definitely through middle school at least. And it depends on where they want to take their learning journey. Do they want to go through college? And if so, how can you get a full paid scholarship? Because we are not in a place where we can, pay for your college and save up for your college. So, where do you want to go as far as your learning? Do you want to go to college? Okay, let's find scholarships and let's get you working in that area that you want to learn more in. But I definitely want to teach them through middle school, and they'll have the option if they want to go into high school, or at least they'll have the option during the high school age if they want to like go to public school and see what it's like. And they always have the freedom to come back if they don't want to stay. And so they have that freedom to go. And if they don't like it, come out and continue their education. But yeah, so it depends on where they want to go. Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go straight into a work or a trade? And we'll try to work as a guide, the older they get, and not as someone who tells them what to do and in this all-knowing way, you should do this or you should go there. And, but we'll just guide them and let them make their decisions. And hope I don't screw them up. Hope my husband and I both, don't screw them up in the process. So if you've listened this far in the podcast, thank you so much for listening. I have so many other topics that I want to delve into as far as race, women's issues, women that I admire from history, talking about their lives, books that I've read that I want to kind of have someone to talk to, have an audience to talk to about it. The topic of adoption, international adoption, and wanting to have a conversation with people who have been adopted or people who are thinking about adopting or parents who are adoptive parents, like just wanting to have a conversation with them. So this is my first podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like what you've heard and you want to hear more and want to be on this journey with me, I know what I'm doing. I don't know. Then please subscribe and comment to the channel that I have on YouTube, Third Shift Off a Cliff, because a lot of these things I'm doing after my kids have gone down for bed. That's when I get to have my time where I read and study and gather my thoughts and things that I want to talk about and discuss. I guess one of the big things that I've been kind of in the side of my mind that I've been reading about too is war, and just talking about that. So anyways, yeah, if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so that you will get them as I post them. And thank you for listening. Keep questioning and keep being awesome.